years while they were doing those war games, it did not go particularly well. But they did a new one, the Air Force did, just a few months back, that introduced some new capabilities, and it totally flipped how that went. And it wasn't about the sheer volume of stuff that we had. It was about having a different set of capabilities, capabilities that could survive, capabilities that could get information to our warfighters reliably in crucial circumstances. That drives home that point. It isn't how much money we're spending, it's what we're spending it on and how it reflects the threats that we face today. The last point that I'm anxious to hear from our witnesses about is we've had a fair amount of difficulty in terms of protecting our service members. Focus has been on sexual assault in the military. We have not adequately dealt with that. And I think there is wide bipartisan support for the idea that we need to make some big changes to try to address that. This committee has passed a number of provisions to attempt to address this issue. We are not there yet. There is going to be a big change in that. It is, however, not just sexual assault. I know that both of you gentlemen have looked closely at the report that came out of Fort Hood and some of the command structure problems that were down there that led to many problems with the force. We need to figure out how do we recruit, train, and protect our service members and their families, because as you all know, that's what makes defense go. The systems are great, but it's the people that make it happen. We are an all-volunteer military. We need to make sure that people still want to serve in the military, want to keep serving in the military, and feel, most importantly, that they and their families are safe when doing so. And I think we've got a lot of work to do in that area. I thank you both for being here. I look forward to your testimony. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Rogers for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the witnesses being here. I know y'all are busy, but this is very important to us and the nation to be able to hear from you. So thank you for your preparation and your presence and your service to our country. Last month, Admiral Davidson testified that, quote, "there is no guarantee the United States would win a future conflict with China," close quote. In fact, in almost every war game conducted by the Pentagon over the last decade, the United States lost to China. The Chinese Communist Party now controls the largest Navy in the world and the largest army in the world. It has more troops, more ships, and more ground-based missiles than the United States. And while we are still developing hypersonic missiles, the CCP is fielding them. The facts couldn't be more clear. China is a very real threat to our national security. Both Secretary Austin and General Milley have acknowledged that point. At his confirmation hearing, Secretary Austin said, quote, "China presents the most significant threat going forward," close quote. General Milley testified before the Senate, from a strictly military standpoint, China represented our greatest threat. Here's the problem. The president apparently doesn't see things the same way. If he did, I don't understand why he'd send us a wholly inadequate defense budget. This budget request doesn't keep pace with China. It doesn't even keep pace with inflation. In fact, it constitutes over a $4 billion cut in real spending dollars. This budget cuts the size of the Navy and starves the shipbuilding industry. It cuts procurement budgets across the board, delaying critical modernization efforts. Air Force procurements are slashed by 12%, missile defense by more than 15%. There's a $25 billion unfunded priorities list, much of which are critical capabilities our warfighters need to counter China. The budget accelerates divestment of important capabilities, including over 200 fighter and reconnaissance aircraft. It doesn't seem to matter that these are still needed on the battlefield. And as the services struggle to meet recruiting goals, the budget cuts in strength. Ask the administration why they propose such an anemic budget, and they struggle for excuses. They tell us that the savings they produce today are being reinvested in future capabilities, except that's not the case. Slashing procurements and accelerating divestments produces nearly $13 billion in so-called savings. But the research and development of new capabilities increases by only $5 billion. Then they tell us the fact that defense spending is hemmed in is because of fiscal realities. That might make sense if the president wasn't proposing spending of unprecedented amounts on money on progressive wish lists, but not so on national security or defense. The budget proposes massive increases in funding for the EPA and the Department of Education, HHS, and Commerce. In all, non-defense discretionary spending grows by an astonishing 16%, 10 times more than defense. And that it doesn't count the $1.9 trillion wasted on so-called COVID stimulus. More than $1.7 billion of that bill was spent on progressive priorities like stimulus checks to prisoners, illegal immigrants, and bailouts of union pension funds, but not a dime for defense. Nor does it include the infrastructure bill they're talking about, which spends money on everything under the sun except defense. The cost for that fiasco could range anywhere from $1 to $6 trillion of new mandatory spending. The only reason the president's not spending more on defense is because the radical left is pushing him to cut it. They want to slash defense spending by 10% or more. To his credit, the president has not gone that far, but what he's proposing is far from what we need for a credible deterrent. The National Defense Strategy Commission recommends an annual increase of 3 to 5% above inflation to stay ahead of China. Each one of the service chiefs and combatant commanders that I've talked with publicly has endorsed that level of spending. Deputy Secretary Hicks supported it when she was a commissioner on that very commission. I suspect that the level of funding Secretary Austin and General Milley would like to see is that same amount as well. Given the colossal amounts of money the president and the majority are throwing around these days, I outright reject the notion that we can't somehow find 3 to 5% for our national security. If this budget was being driven by risk instead of politics, 3 to 5% is the level of growth we would see. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Mr. Secretary, I know you're doing the best you can with what you've been given, but it's wrong to put you in this position. This budget robs our warfighters of vital capabilities they need to carry out their mission, and it fails to adequately support our defense industrial base. Most regrettably, it gives China more time to enhance their military advantage and undermine deterrence. I urge my colleagues to reject this budget and work in a bipartisan manner with our colleagues to address the urgent needs on national defense. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you are recognized.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the President's budget request for fiscal year 2022. I'm pleased to appear alongside General Milley, whose counsel has been crucial to us as we developed our budget and as we continue to defend this nation, which remains our top priority. I'm also grateful to have our Comptroller, Mike McCord, with us today. And let me say at the outset that I believe our budget request will help us match our resources to strategy and strategy to policy and policy to the will of the American people. This budget is informed by the President's interim national security guidance and by my own message to the force. We believe that it funds the right mix of capabilities that we need most to defend this nation now and in the future. It invests in hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, microelectronics, 5G technology, and space-based systems, shipbuilding, and nuclear modernization, to name a few. In fact, this budget asks you to approve nearly $28 billion to modernize our nuclear triad and $112 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation, which is the largest R&D request ever put forth by this department. Our request also gives us the flexibility to divest ourselves of systems and platforms that no longer meet our needs, including older ships, aircraft, and ISR platforms that demand more maintenance, upkeep, and risk than we can afford. The department must be ready to keep pace with our competitors, and if necessary, to fight and win the next war, and not the last one. And that's why we've commissioned a global posture review and a new national defense strategy, which will further inform and guide our resource decisions. This budget reflects our focus on the pacing challenge that we clearly see from the People's Republic of China, to include more than $5 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. Earlier this month, after our China task force completed its work, I issued an internal directive kicking off department-wide efforts that will, among other things, help bolster our deterrence against the PRC and revitalize our network of regional allies and partners, and accelerate the development of cutting-edge capabilities and new operational concepts. However, China is not our only challenge. Our budget also invests $617 million to counter the damaging effects of climate change and additional funds to prepare for future challenges like another pandemic. It helps us to counter belligerence from Russia, especially in the cyber realm. And you'll see more than $10 billion devoted to cybersecurity, cyberspace operations, and cyber research and development. And with this emphasis on space and missile defense and more sophisticated sensors, our budget will also help us counter the increasing ballistic missile capabilities of nations like North Korea and Iran. It funds a troop presence and counterterrorism capabilities in the Middle East and South Asia to meet the threats posed not only by Iran, but also by terrorist networks like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and in Africa like those posed by Al-Shabaab. And it helps us maintain the integrated deterrent capability and global posture necessary to back up the hard work of our diplomats, allies, and partners. Now, I know that Afghanistan remains at the top of all of our minds, and I can report that our withdrawal remains on pace. Last week in Brussels, we updated our NATO allies, and I was encouraged by their continued support for the new direction that we're taking. We've accomplished the mission for which our troops were sent to Afghanistan some 20 years ago. And I'm very proud of the brave men and women who made it possible and those who gave their lives for that mission. And I'm also deeply grateful to the families of our service members who have endured so much as they sent their sons, daughters, husbands, and wives into battle. We will now transition to a new bilateral relationship with our Afghan partners, one that helps them meet their responsibilities to their citizens, but one that will not require a U.S. footprint larger than what's necessary to protect our diplomats. And that's one reason why we're asking to move overseas contingency operations funding inside the budget. This will add greater transparency, accountability, and predictability to the budgeting process, and frankly, it's overdue. Now, this budget also takes care of our people. It increases funding to support in-home care and support, which has become increasingly important during this pandemic. We also seek to improve military base pay and retention bonuses and other incentives that will help us attract and retain the best talent. And we will be working hard to combat challenges that make service in the ranks more difficult for all the men and women of the department, from getting a better handle on the extent to which we experience extremist behavior to combating sexual assault and harassment. As you know, my first directive as Secretary of Defense, issued on my first full day in the office, was to service leadership about sexual assault. Yesterday, I received the final recommendations and complete report of the Independent Review Commission, and I want to thank Lynn Rosenthal for her exceptional leadership on this commission, as well as the talented experts who worked so hard and so diligently to support her. The result is a comprehensive assessment across 4 lines of effort: accountability, prevention, climate and culture, and victim care and support. And that assessment recommends creative and evidence-based options. In the coming days, I'll present to President Biden my specific recommendations about the Commission's finding, but I know enough at this point to say that I fully support removing the prosecution of sexual assaults and related crimes from the military chain of command. We are prepared to work with Congress to amend the Uniform Code of Military Justice in this regard. The IRC also recommended the inclusion of other special victims crimes inside this independent prosecution system to include domestic violence, and I support this as well, given the strong correlation between these sorts of crimes and the prevalence of sexual assault. As we move forward, I believe that it's important to make changes that are both scoped to the problem that we're trying to solve and properly resourced. The department will likely need new authorities to implement many of the IRC's recommendations, and we will most assuredly require additional resources both in personnel and in funding. And we look forward to having those discussions with this committee. And we must treat this as the leadership issue that it is. And Chairman Smith and members of the committee, we feel the greatest military in human history, made up of the finest men and women who have ever donned the cloth of this nation. We also enjoy a civilian workforce deeply committed to every mission that we take on. No adversary can match the quality of our people. And I am immensely proud and humbled to serve with them again, and I can assure you that the President's budget request for fiscal year 22 fulfills our obligations to them and to their families. And I thank you for your steadfast support of the Department of Defense and for all that you do to ensure that we remain ready to defend this nation. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General Milley.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And it remains my distinct honor and privilege to represent the United States Joint Force, the most capable military in the world. Our troops remain the best led, best equipped, and best trained force anywhere, and that is largely due to the efforts of this Congress. And I want to personally thank Secretary Austin and his steady leadership and wise guidance. Your joint force is standing watch, protecting American interests in all domains, air, sea, land, cyber, and space around the globe 24/7. We are also fully engaged here at home in both defense support to civil authorities through COVID-19 medical support, as well as homeland defense to keep Americans safe. We are conducting major exercises in Europe. We are monitoring the DMZ in Korea. We are conducting freedom of navigation operations in the strategic waterways of the global commons. We are sustaining operations in space and cyberspace. We are supporting our allies and partners in Africa and Latin America, and we are patrolling the skies of the Middle East. And our joint force is currently conducting a safe, responsible, and deliberate strategic retrograde from Afghanistan in good order while ensuring the continued support to the Afghan National Security Force. The purpose of the United States military is simple. It is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And with that comes two key tasks. Task one is to prepare for war in order to deter our enemies. And key task two is to fight and win America's wars if deterrence fails. The United States military is a critical component of our overall national power. The combination of our diplomatic efforts, economic strength, and the overriding hope of the American message and our military capability will deter adversaries and preserve great power peace in this era of great power competition. The current geostrategic landscape is witnessing rapid change, and the potential for threats to peace and stability in various regions and indeed the world is increasing, not decreasing. States and non-state actors are rapidly transforming technologically, and we are bearing witness to a fundamental change in the character of war, as Chairman Smith pointed out. In particular, China is increasing its military capability at a very serious and sustained rate, and we must ensure that we retain our competitive and technological edge against this pacing threat. Readiness, modernization, and combat power are key to deter war and maintain the peace. And equally important are the combat multipliers of teamwork, cohesion, and well-led units. We must resolve the issue of sexual assault, and I and all the chiefs are in alignment with what the Secretary of Defense just said. And we must confront the issue of extremism. Both are corrosive, and the very essence of what it means to be in the military is negatively impacted if we allow them to continue. Additionally, we must continue to invest in leader development and talent management required for a future operating environment. And finally, we must continue to nurture and sustain a key strategic source of our strength, which is our network of many close allies and partners around the world. The Joint Force appreciates the work that our elected representatives do to ensure that we have the resources needed to be ready. The days of the Budget Control Act are over, and repeated continuing resolutions, hopefully, are behind us for good. The Joint Force will deliver modernization of our armed forces and security to the people of the United States at the FY22 President's proposed budget request of $715 billion. The American people have entrusted to us a significant commitment of treasure, and we will work diligently to ensure it is spent prudently in the best interests of the nation. In alignment with the interim national security strategic guidance, this budget makes hard choices, but it delivers a ready, agile, and capable joint force that will compete successfully. It will deter, and it will win across all domains and which is postured for continued overmatch in the future. This budget's focus is on the future and prioritizes nuclear modernization, long-range fires, hypersonic technology, artificial intelligence, shipbuilding, microelectronics, space, cyber, and 5G. These investments, in concert with our recently developed joint warfighting concept, will pave the way for a joint force of the future. The President's budget for FY22, this request increases the readiness and ensures our people are our number one priority. Consistent, predictable budgets informed by the will of the people are critical to our nation's defense, and the passage of this budget in a timely way is important. The FY22 presidential budget strikes an appropriate balance between preserving present readiness and future modernization. It's a down payment on the investment of the future, with a bias toward the future operating environment and the change in the character of war. It is now that we must set ourselves on a path to modernize the joint force, and this budget contributes to doing just that. Many enemies, historically, have grossly underestimated the United States and our people. We are ready now, and we will remain so in the future, and any adversary of the United States of America should not underestimate our military capability, our skill, and our combat power. Our job as your joint force, our contract with the American people, is that we, the United States military, will be able to fight and win when called upon, and we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States always and forever. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.